I have the great pleasure of introducing Holly yet again. Round of applause. But also a chap who probably doesn't know it, but I've known him longer than he knows me, which is a bit weird, because I'm ex-NCC group. Any ex-NCC in the room, put your hand up. Boo. Yeah, so I remember you from the NCC group days, but you probably won't remember that because you're too busy trying to run out the door at the time. But I have watched Ken for decades. I will say that in honour, because he's an old guy just like me. But the difference is he's actually done some really cool stuff. If you've never seen anything that Ken Munro has done, you've missed a lot, and there's a lot to get up on the catch-up. But I have got the great honour to introduce Ken and Holly. We'll start with Holly, and I'll hand over to these guys.
Hello, everybody. This is just to let you know that I'm running a workshop at 11 o'clock. I was just given a vague description. It's like, hey, if we give you an hour, can you do a workshop? So that is the workshop. The content that I've put together is like an introduction to hands-on web application hacking. So if you're a student and you want to see some pen testing stuff, it would be good for you. Maybe you're an infrastructure tester and you want to see some web stuff, it would be good for you. If you had any questions that didn't get answered when I did my talk, still good for you. If you want a Fox, also good for you. Just sort of come out and hang out. That's fine. It's going to be very, very casual. I've got some CTF style things. I'll do some content around cross-site scripting and all of that kind of awful stuff. And that is it. If you come just for a Fox, I will judge you, but as long as you're fast, you will still get a Fox.
Wow, that was quick. I've now got a pad. So I want to say a few words. First of all, Lancaster University is a very soft spot in my heart. I came here, I studied applied physics in 1991, which makes me really old. I also met my now wife here, so when I was asked by BSides Lancaster to come and get involved, I was like, abso-bloody-lutely. Sadly, though, that's the good news. I read applied physics. I got the balance between working and studying and partying quite wrong, and they kicked me out in my third year. So, in the middle of the early 90s recession, so I ended up working at the hotel across the road for nearly 3 years. So stayed there last night. Very, very odd experience going back 30 years of my life. As a result of being kicked out, I made some very questionable career choices. I am giving career advice in the Careers Village later. So if you want some really shit advice, come and talk to me. Please disregard everything I say. One of the things I love about BSides, more than anything, is I get to meet my heroes. And last night I got to have a beer with Chris Roberts, who I've been following for a very, very long time. Thank God he's left the room so I can blow smoke up his arse without embarrassing anyone. Chris started me on a journey a very long time ago. He doesn't know it, but you probably remember, he tweeted back in 2015 about some cybersecurity concerns in aeroplanes. And that started me on a journey which combined my two loves, flying and the cybers. I'm a pilot. I'm a ship pilot, actually. I have genuinely landed at the wrong airport. I have caused an international incident when my airplane was impounded by French customs because I forgot to tell them I was coming. That was a bit awkward. I've had 2 engine failures and I've had 2 gear hang-ups. So please don't ever come and fly with me. You're taking your life into your own hands if you do. But that really got me going down a path. One of the things that we all experienced through the horrors of COVID, there were bizarrely a few interesting rays of light through COVID. Might sound odd to talk about that now, but one of the rays of light that opened up for us was that a lot of aeroplanes got grounded early. It meant that aeroplanes that were perfectly capable of flying because they couldn't fly were now grounded. And a lot of those fleets were retired much earlier than they should have been. It also, because a lot of the airplanes were retired at once, meant that the boneyards, the breakers yards, got backed up, which meant they had huge backlogs of aeroplanes sat there waiting to be taken apart. So we, in our wisdom, picked up the phone to one of the boneyards in Kemble, near Gloucester, Cheltenham Way, and asked, what are you doing with the planes? And they said, well, they're going to sit there until we get around to taking them apart and turning them into tin cans. I said, right, okay, if we give you money, will you power them up for us? Like, yep. So we arranged to go down to Kemble. We had to do a little bit of security vetting, went airside, and were given carte blanche to hack planes that were never going to fly again. And as a result of that, got to learn an enormous amount about cybersecurity of airplanes. Now, You've probably seen stories in the press about hacking planes. The world seems to lose its shit when someone talks about hacking an aeroplane. So you need to be really careful. Don't hack planes. It's illegal and dangerous. We only work on aeroplanes that are never going to fly again, which is the only way you can do it safely. You cannot sit in the seat of an aeroplane and you cannot take control of the aeroplane. Why? Because the in-flight entertainment system is a completely separate, dirty network where we go, we're allowed to play and touch. You don't do that, right? You'll be arrested, you'll get a flight ban if you're caught hacking a plane in flight. There's also very, very strong network segregation between the passenger and information services domain and the aircraft control domain, which is the bit that the pilots do, which is uppy, downy, lefty, righty, that sort of stuff. There is very, very robust segregation between those domains. Even the Boeing 787, you might remember the FAA delayed its launch because they weren't completely confident in the degree of segregation between the control domains. So, COVID happened. We got to mess around with airplanes. We also hired a couple of pilots who'd been laid off by the airlines. They make for amazing pen testers, by the way. Really, really rigorous. But we also mined them for lots of information about the use of commercial airplane systems. I know how to fly. I know how to use Garmin kit, but I don't know how to use the sort of flight systems you find up front in a commercial airliner. So we mined them for information, both about the technology, operating procedures, and also how they're used. And that's when we started to make some really interesting findings. And that's when we started to realize that in order to prove these things, we couldn't do it for real on a plane because we'd crash it and that'd be bad, right? So that's why we bought flight simulators. We've got 2 flight sims. We couldn't get the big one here today, I'm afraid. It's actually too big to go in the doors to the lecture theatre. So we've got a smaller flight sim, and what we're using that to do is show you some vulnerabilities that we found in airplanes. The plane systems are safe. The plane systems are secure. However, pilots are increasingly using apps and other sources of data to configure the aeroplane. And a good example of that is the electronic flight bag. Now, back in the day, when you saw pilots go, they always had a big briefcase like this that weighed a ton. And that was full of all the approach and departure plates for the various airports they were going to. So when you come into land, there's a very specific process and route you must follow with reporting points, configuration systems, minimum altitudes, speeds, directions, all those sort of things. And you carried a piece of paper, usually made by a company called Jeppesen, and it had to be checked and updated every month. Weighed a ton. Very easily and quickly got out of date, cost a fortune to keep maintained. So, we use iPads now. Hey, what could go wrong? And those systems contain all of the approach charts and plates that we're going to need to tell us how to arrive at an airport. It also, when they get updated, it's done electronically, it's really quick, saves a load of weight. But we've had huge advances in efficiency as well. Now, you might not be aware that when you sit at the end of the runway in an airplane, in a commercial airplane, it's very, very rare that the pilot uses full thrust on the engines. It's almost unheard of. There's a reason for that, is using full thrust wears the engines excessively, which costs money. It burns extra fuel, which costs money, and it pumps out more carbon dioxide than you need to, which damages the environment. So, for efficiency reasons, we use what's called a performance calculator to work out how much power we need to take off. So that's going to involve all sorts of bits of information. So the length of the runway. So if I haven't got enough runway to accelerate, I need more power. If I'm heavy, so I'm a big airplane, fueled and got lots of freight and passengers, if I'm heavy, I'm going to need more power. If there's not much wind coming down the runway, it's going to take me more power to get up to flight speed. And there's lots and lots of other different factors that go into that calculation to tell the pilot what percentage of thrust they should use. That will spit out, in the case of Boeing airplanes, it's called a D rate, and it'll tell you what percentage of thrust to use. Typically what you do is you actually set a configuration, so you still put the throttles forward, but actually the flight management computer tells the engines how much power to make. In the case of Airbus, it's called a flex temp, and what it does is it puts a temperature output that fools the pressure ratios in the engine to producing less power than they need to. So very, very rarely use full power in a plane. What we've discovered are a bunch of the apps and the electronic flight bags themselves have got security flaws. And what that means in certain conditions, some of which are remote, you can actually tell the calculator to spit out the wrong amount of power. So a pilot in a heavy plane on a short runway puts the wrong amount of power on and either goes off the end of the runway, it has happened, a MAN cargo flight crashed, in Canada several years ago with the loss of the entire plane or crew, very sadly. But what's more common and more likely to happen is the plane will tail strike. Now, that means as the pilot's rotating, what you'd expect to happen is the nose to go up and the plane to accelerate away and climb away before the back of the plane hits the runway. Now, on average, 5 to 6 times a day around the world, tail strikes occur anyway by pilots mishandling planes. So they happen all the time. There have been numerous cases where the pilots have accidentally put the wrong data from the app into flight management systems and caused a tail strike too. To the point where sometimes it's just a little rub, easily fixed, just a bit of markings on the paint. Other occasions, we've seen the entire rear of the aircraft torn away. We've seen damage to flight controls. We've seen damage to pressure bulkheads. A right mess. Kind of a makes for a bad day, right? So we've discovered vulnerabilities that allow you to make pilots crash planes. That's why we have the flight simulator, because we don't want to do it for real. Over the last couple of years, we've been out doing tours around the various manufacturers and operators of airplanes, so the airlines, showing them what we found, disclosing vulnerabilities privately, getting them fixed, and hopefully it's just a little bit safer. So that's why we've got the flight simulator here today. The sim will be running all day. I know there's kind of a workshop lined up, but actually we'll be running through the whole day. And if you want to come along and try and land our Airbus A320, we'll stick some bad configurations in there to simulate that the plane's been hacked. And you can see if you can land it and walk away. Very few people do. So, without further ado, I'll leave you to it. It's time for a break. Come fly the flight simulator. Hopefully enjoy it. Thank you.